I'll die.
Like Jonah went through a big fish.
Yes.
So we finished up last time with the story of the three men in the fiery furnace. We looked at how Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego navigated this issue of trying to live a Christian life, a faithful Christian life, and at the same time really being involved in and a part of the culture and world in which they lived, right? And that is still our challenge today, and maybe getting to be more so in many ways, as in our own country anyway. The percentage of the population that is a practicing Christian and confessing Christians is getting smaller before it's getting larger. That's just where we're at historically. So that challenge, and saw some of the examples of what they, so to speak, compromised on, or what they accommodated in their lives on the one hand, and that those places where they said, I got to hold the line here. I have to hold the line here. So, participation and endurance, just kind of forging ahead today with some application and some biblical looks at this. So, early Christian assimilation with the cultures in which they live. So, the men in Babylon, of course, that's Old Testament. It's a long time ago. That was 2,600 years ago. They were dealing with the issues. The early Christians found themselves in a similar position. The Jewish culture they'd grown up with was familiar culturally, but now their faith was somewhat different from their Jewish neighbors who had not received Jesus as Savior. And as they went out into the world to do their work, as they got to what's modern-day Turkey, as they got to Greece, as they got to Italy, and Christianity planted in those places, you had very foreign cultures and very foreign ideas about things, and they had to work out this same kind of issue. They were this tiny minority. You know, we read the book of Acts. During this Easter season of the year, we have a lot of our first lesson in the Sunday service isn't an Old Testament lesson. In the Easter season, we take them often from the book of Acts instead. And you see the church, and you see the Apostle Paul's work, and you see Peter's work, and you think, man, I wish we could go back to those good old days when the church grew by 3,000 people in a single day, and you had people added all the time, and all these success stories. And what we forget is that while, okay, they might have had 3,000 people added in to the church on Pentecost Day in Jerusalem, that was all the Christians there were. It's not as though that was part of a big denomination that went beyond that. And as the Apostle Paul does his work, yes, he talks about, by name, these people who came to the faith in these places. He planted churches all across the Mediterranean world. But those congregations very often weren't much bigger than this one. The little groups trying to hang on. And, you know, at least, if not the majority of your neighbors, many of your neighbors in this area are still Christians. They were all by themselves. So they had to figure out this same thing. And it was that much more urgent and likely that much more pressing upon them in how they felt than it would even be for us. But so there's some things to pick up here. So we're actually going to look at a quote here. This is a 2nd century, so somewhere between 1 and 200 AD. And this is beyond the New Testament time. A quote from a man named Diognetus. And he is writing for others about how Christians fit. Okay, so he's one of the early church fathers, and he has this to say. For Christians are not distinguished from the rest of humanity by country, language, or custom. So it quickly became not just the God of Israel, not just the God of Greece, not just the God of Italy. Right? It was spreading everywhere. And so country, language, custom, that was going to be different very quickly among them. For nowhere do they live in cities of their own, nor do they speak some unusual dialect, nor do they practice an eccentric way of life. Well, at least in most things, right? This teaching of theirs has not been discovered by the thought and reflection of ingenious people, nor do they promote any human doctrine as some do. They live in both Greek and barbarian cities as each one's lot was cast, and follow the local customs in dress and food and other aspects of life. So on the one hand, he's recognizing that wherever the Christians were planted, wherever they lived, they tried. The old saying is, when in Rome, do as the Romans, right? Do.
In case, no. Always.
When I've met some of my brothers in the ministry who've had foreign mission assignments, they'll sometimes have some of the local costume that they wear, other local customs and foods that they eat. They try to accommodate themselves as much and assimilate as much as they can into those cultures. I just wear regular black shoes now for the most part. I still have my others, but some people noted when I first came here, I had black dress cowboy boots that I would wear on Sunday mornings. I still have them in my closet. I haven't pulled them out.
Cowboys in Oklahoma.
Yes, they fit here, but Minnesota, where I grew up, not so much. Yeah. So that's something I had gotten from Texas and wore here on Sundays for a while. I haven't pulled them out for a while for whatever reason. Everybody always told me, there's nothing more comfortable. Yeah, yes, there is, actually. But that's just propaganda. But anyway, you accommodate yourself to some of those kinds of things. You try to adopt some of the local custom, etc. And the early Christians did the same. But that's not the whole story here. At the same time, they demonstrate the remarkable and admittedly unusual character of their own citizenship. They live in their own countries, in other words, the geographical location where they are, but only as non-residents. They participate in everything as citizens and endure everything as foreigners. Every foreign country is their fatherland, and every fatherland is foreign. So this is the other side of it. There's any number of Bible passages that reflect that for the people of the Scriptures also. But this was the practice. I think I quoted the hymn last time we met. I'm but a stranger here, heaven is my home. Earth's but a desert drear, heaven is my home. Fairly well-known traditional hymn often sung at funerals that reflects the same kind of idea. When you have the great by faith chapter in Hebrews chapter 11, after the author talks a little bit about Abraham, who, of course, moved 1,000 miles across the Fertile Crescent from the area near the Persian Gulf to where modern-day Israel is, he and then the generation after him and the generation after him lived as nomads, and they lived in tents, and they were in the land, but they were not of that land. And that becomes kind of a pattern. And the author of Hebrews talks about the fact that if they wanted to settle in one place, they had opportunity for that, but they didn't think of or look at this world as being their home in that sense. They were looking for another city and a better place. Compare Luke 15. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So this is Jesus, of course. How does this description of Jesus apply to the way his followers live and interact in their world, and why is that important?
All sinners are equals. Equally.
So what was Jesus doing? In what way was Jesus accommodating himself? In what way was he still maintaining a difference here? What was the Pharisees' approach to the world?
Stay away from sinners.
All right.
Don't convert them.
If you don't fit our little group just exactly the way it is, we want nothing to do with you at all. And even in Israel itself, Jesus lived his life in such a way that he could eat at the home of Matthew the tax collector with Matthew's friends. And he could sit down with the people who had publicly bad reputations. And he could associate with them. But what line would he have maintained? He may have eaten with sinners,
Not do what they do.
but he's not going to join in the sinful activity itself. So he lives as a part of the world, and even with the sinful people to a degree, and yet at the same time,
Apart from the world.
apart from the world, he's not of the world. He manages this distinction, right? And
They're not goyim. They're not.
No, these are well, yeah. They would have. They were this.
I'm sorry, I forgot the word, but
Well,
I mean they weren't.
they were sinners.
They were sinners, but they weren't. They were Jewish.
They were still Jewish.
So there wasn't the laws of the dietary laws of not eating with. That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. So you didn't have some of the cultural differences
Right.
entirely.
Right.
Although even with this, so in the areas, so remember Jesus goes to, at one point in his ministry, the area was called Decapolis, and it would have been around the more eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. And he drives a man out, drives demons out of a man, who's, the demons referred to themselves as Legion because there were so many. Remember where the demons go?
To the swine.
Yeah.
The swine.
And this is an area where there was so much Jewish accommodation of the Greek way of life that pork was something that they had brought into their diet and such.
You don't think it were Gentiles that were raising that?
They were not all Gentiles in that area, from what we know. It was a little bit more like Samaria and the Samaritans, where it was kind of Jewish, but it was not really faithfully Jewish. And so you had that kind of thing going. Well, and that was the problem with Samaritans too, right? I don't know to what degree, the part of the ceremonial law, the Samaritans especially had changed, had to do with worship in Jerusalem. But that was something of a heritage they had gotten from the people who had lived in that part of the world, where even during the divided kingdom, in Samaria, in the northern kingdom, the kings had tried to prevent the people from going down to Jerusalem to worship. So they had given up what was a big part, a huge part, maybe the major part of the ceremonial law regarding the worship life.
The Samaritans.
The Samaritans, yeah.
I say.
And, I mean, they weren't goyim. They weren't the
Well,
the nation.
that's a 20th century.
Well, no, but that was very...
up your.
No, that right. Yeah, that was... That was not a complimentary thing for a Jew to say about another person. In our time, if you were Orthodox
I was
Jewish,
married to my first wife.
okay, but at the same time, that's not a 20th century development. That is something that they had from way back.
Well, who
right?
was good enough for the Pharisees? Who did they think was good enough?
Themselves.
The Pharisees.
So,
They were that isolated. They were better than everybody.
so you'd have a church of Pharisees?
Well, they were they kind of tried to control the synagogues, but there's in the book of John in particular, you have a lot of the record of Jesus arguing with, John just calls them the Jews. But by 100 AD, when he says the Jews, he really means the Jewish leadership. But at this point in time, because the Jewish leadership is what's ruling, he just calls them the Jews, right? But much of that would have been Pharisees and Sadducees, but they were two very different sects among the Jews. They didn't like each other that much. But the Sadducees controlled the temple. The Pharisees tended to control the synagogues spread throughout the nation. And since they were kind of the top dogs there, they ran the synagogue life, but they had very little respect for the common people. There's some place in the book of John where they talk about this rabble who knows nothing, thinks highly of Jesus. They're all going to follow him, but that's just that common rabble that we have to put up with. It was very snooty in their view.
But Jesus, he followed all those laws in the Old Testament. Right?
Oh, absolutely,
That's
perfectly.
That's what you're saying here. He followed that. But if he was sitting at a table, he wouldn't eat any pork.
No, he would not have eaten pork because ceremonial law at that point in history had not yet been fulfilled and had not come to its completion. You see this later in the time of Acts chapter 10. Peter is called by God to go preach the gospel at the house of Cornelius. And to prepare Peter for this, Peter has this vision where the sheet rolls down from heaven with all the unclean animals in it. And God says to Peter, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter's reply is, not so, Lord. I've never eaten any unclean food. And God's reply to him in the vision is, what I've declared clean, don't you call unclean. And that's clearly then God indicating that that ceremonial law has served its purpose until Christ came. But going forward, you're going to need to win these people, and I don't really care what you eat. And you're going to have to associate with Gentiles, and that's going to be a necessity. And so you need to let that go. You need to follow the moral law about proper treatment of other people, law of love. You need to follow the moral law regarding, I'm the only God. But you're going to have to start accommodating yourself to some of these cultural issues because you need to win these people.
If you live where I live, you have to belong to get it with everybody.
Well, there's a degree to which that's true for everybody, right? I mean, you may have it when you're living in a kind of a community like you are, a little bit more urgent, but yeah.
With 100 at least.
Well, right, yes, yeah. Anyway, so they already Jesus is setting the tone for this, and he had to deal with it within his own culture and time, is my point. And even to the point where if a person was living a publicly immoral or sinful life, that did not mean he shunned them altogether, right? He wouldn't join them in their immorality. He was not afraid to tell them about their immorality. He would call a spade, but he would continue to love them. But that's a hard thing to balance, right? But at same time, you tell people how it is, but you don't do so in such a way that you give the impression you're trying to shove them away. That you do so winsomely, with the intent of gaining them. But in order to really truly gain them, you have to get them past the besetting sin that is standing in the way of faith and salvation, right?
So love the sinner and not the...
Yeah. You have to stay away from the sin, but continue to love the sinner no matter what, right? Sometimes it's a fine line to try to run down. Except that in terms of your own moral behavior, you got to stay away from whatever the sinful activity is. That you have to do. That's living as the foreigner in the world. And yet you have this other side. What are the challenges of living this way of life if one is not also regularly participating in a local congregation?
Falling into the sinful side of things.
So, the Bible, the New Testament, Christianity, the Christian creeds never anticipate or approve of the idea of Christians trying to go solo. Christian life is always part of a community. It's part of a congregation. It is part of a church. Now, there can be extenuating circumstances where you find yourself in a part of the world where you're just the only one. Okay, that's a little different thing, right? If you were preaching the gospel in China and ended up in a Chinese prison, all right, you don't really have a whole lot of choice. Joseph in Egypt, in Potiphar's house, and then in the prison, he's got to maintain his faith and his faith life all by himself. But, we believe in the Holy Christian Church, the communion of saints, and that implies and assumes relationship with other Christians. Okay? That you're regularly in contact. And so part of the challenge of doing this is if you're going to try to do it without being actually involved in or part of a Christian congregation where you've got some community that does think your same way and believe your same way, where you've got the encouragement of people who are on your side. One of the things that, now we're actually going to miss our spring conference, it looks like, but one of the things about going to pastors' conferences, sometimes as a pastor you can feel a little bit like it's you against the world. And then you go to a pastor's conference or a bigger gathering of pastors in the synod. A year ago I was up in Chicago we had a hotel ballroom in Chicago with over 1,000 pastors and active church members and workers. And then you remember, I'm not alone. I've got other people who are preaching the same gospel, facing the same issues, dealing with the same things. And they are my friends, and they've got my back, and I've got their back. And that makes just a world of difference for being able to navigate this. So if you're going to do it without a local Christian congregation, it's going to be tough. And not to say there can't be sometimes extenuating circumstances, but go ahead.
In the early church, they were setting up these monks and hermits and stuff like that. And of course, Luther says, well, you're not any more holy when you're a monk or a hermit or something like that. But the early church fathers were talking to these monks and saying you need to be in community. Because otherwise you're just going to wander off and do something bizarre, and not.
And sometimes they did do some bizarre.
Yeah, they did some bizarre stuff, but
Yeah.
but they said you need to be in a community. You need to be in a.
So it's not as though the monasteries never offered any service to the communities in which they were, but there was this tendency for them to see it as just an escape from the world, cut themselves off from the world, in an attempt to be holier than everybody else. And that's where Luther in particular said, that is no holier way of life, because how do you love if you're never in contact with anybody? That doesn't work. In order to love people, you have to be in contact with other people. And that may sometimes mean you get a little dirt on your shoes. Not that you're seeking to participate in the world as they do, but you've got to be out there trying and interacting.
Not to make it worse, but in the Middle Ages, the church first, they were worried about getting their heads cut off by every barbarian. But later in the High Middle Ages, the monks were sent out to be friars and to be preach in the towns and villages and things. So the church kicked them out and said, go out and do something.
So how did the gospel get to Ireland? St. Patrick and
Right.
People who were in the monastic system.
Right.
So often those monasteries became the training grounds for the missionaries of the time. We think of, it's a bad thing today that I just saw an interview where it was a street preacher, and
Right.
he had gathered a crowd, part of which was somewhat hostile or antagonistic, right?
Right.
And one of the people in the crowd was saying, well, the only reason you're a Christian is because you were born in the United States. As though Christianity was an American phenomenon. How old do you think this religion is? And where does it come from, and where does it exist? I could have been a Christian if I was born in parts of Central Africa. I could be a Christian if I was born in terms of receiving it from my parents. Christianity is everywhere, and it has been for a long time.
Right.
And so this idea that somehow it's this 20th century American phenomenon, or even 19th century American phenomenon, is just so non-historical, ahistorical, and naive as to be nearly beyond belief. So when we think of Europe, the same kind of thing. People think of Christianity today often as it's the white man's religion. Well, maybe compared to American Indians a century ago, it kind of was, or a couple centuries ago, in that very narrow setting. But in terms of worldwide, no, Jesus was not European, and his early followers weren't European. And it's for several hundred years that the European wing of Christianity wasn't necessarily the strongest one. It went to North Africa, was very strong there, in Egypt and across the North African coast. It went to Turkey, and that was really probably the bigger center, not European, right?
The Greek church.
The Greek church. It took a while for that transition to take place, and so it's just a naive and ahistorical view of Christianity to see it as the white man's religion or an American thing. The Europeans for some time have thought Americans are a bit fanatical because of their religious participation and all. I mean, that's the Europeans themselves now who, they've kind of fallen away from it so much. So at one point in time, Europe had to be one. And much of how that happened was out of the missionaries trained in the monastic movement. And those in places like Italy got trained and ended up taking the gospel to places like Germany, places like England, places like Scandinavia, as the gospel was spread. All right, but
India, which Thomas was missing.
the monastery was a caricature. It was a caricature of God's design for the community of the church. The community needs to be in the community and not a walled city completely apart from it. That was the problem with the monastic system. And it wasn't always as bad as it was at the time of the Reformation. But it was bad enough that, particularly Martin Luther had some bad things to say about it. None of the Protestant churches, for the most part, tried to imitate the monastic system, right? It's not as though the Lutherans were the only ones that said, John Calvin in Geneva, he wasn't going to set up a monastic system. John Knox in Scotland, he wasn't going to set up a monastic system. The Mennonites, they were not going to set up a monastic system, and on it goes, right? They recognize there's problems with that thing because of what it tends to lead to, and that is too much of a separation from the world. And then in that separation, bad things happen internally also. It just becomes too isolated, and there's the flow of love, which wants to be the natural outpouring of the gospel in a person's heart, is cut off, and godly lives are actually stunted rather than grown by that kind of an approach. And so we have to be a little careful also today that we not become so isolated among ourselves that natural flow of love and of gospel witness that wants to be the natural product of the gospel in hearts doesn't get cut off. That does not lead to good things for Christians or Christianity. That's kind of the point here.
The source on that, page 153, is that history?
Diagnatus?
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious.
Oh, no, page 153 here, the million microliter.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are in, where did it go? It's in my
Was it
briefcase.
that?
The book we're going through,
The book.
Upside Down Spirituality.
Gotcha.
So if I put a page number without any other reference, that's that. Those two quotes are Church Father Diagnatus. If you really want to see it, I've got volumes of my, you can pull it out of my shelf in my office. But,
I like those quotes. I was just.
So let's take a look at them quick. So a million microliturgies that inculcate in my heart the belief that life was all about me. That's one of the challenges here, right? So, we have our own liturgy as a church, and it wants to form and shape us. It rehearses us in the main teachings of Christianity. I don't know if you always think about it that way, but that's what's going on with the parts of the liturgy we repeat week after week in church itself. Well, if you're out there in the world, understand that the culture has its own kind of micro-liturgies of a sort that are doing the same kind of thing. And the practices of the world, the little things that we participate in there, often are trying to tell you this very thing, that life is all about me.
Get what you deserve.
Yeah, right.
I don't remember who originally put me onto that, but when you watch commercials, we are here to give you the paint job that you deserve. What do you deserve? What?
What?
We are here to give you the dental work that you deserve, right? We are here to give you the potato chips that you deserve. What? Where does that come from? Where's this idea that I've got, great potato chips or paint or fillings in my teeth coming to me, but that you deserve over and over and over is out there in the advertising world. That's one of those little micro-liturgies driving that thought home to people. And you hear that often enough from enough different sources, and you start to think, I deserve better, right? I deserve better potato chips than I've been eating lately. I'm going to go get some, right? It seems ridiculous because of the trivial things that get thrown in there. But what that works on the mind and the look at life gets to be very different than what Christianity wants us to believe about what we deserve. It's dangerous to go to God after you've heard all that stuff. I want what I deserve.
Okay.
Okay.
Death and hell? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a good example of that kind of thing. And we can go, that's just one little thing. There are other ways of thinking in the world that try to drive that same point home or something similar to it, but something that is antithetical to this Christian idea of I am here to love and to serve. This Christian idea that I am here to spread the gospel. That's not what you're going to get in the culture. Becoming unaware of how culture is deforming heart and life. So another quote from Tradbird. The longer I tried to be a lone Christian without breathing the air of Jerusalem in worship. So he's using this as kind of a metaphor of living, and you get it. Without soaking in her songs and drinking deeply of her streams, the more Babylonialized I became. So you got to be in that world, but keep your guard up while you're there. Recognize what it's trying to do to misshape and deform your spiritual life all the time. And I don't think we fully grasp just how much of that work goes on in us.
I've experienced that.
Well, we all have.
I mean,
The thing is to have come to the realization, right? To
Yeah.
have those light bulb moments when you think, holy
yeah,
cow,
thank goodness.
how different is this than what God had intended?
Exactly.
Okay, so this idea of selfishness and that life is all about me. The constant push of the world in areas of marriage and family and sexual life that is against what Scripture would have from us, right? It just, and it's not a matter of just the world saying, well, this is an alternative you could have. It's that it wants to make the Christian way bad and their way the right and moral thing. It actually flips it 100%, so that you find yourself on the defensive. You find yourself almost feeling shamed or guilty if you're trying to live and promote the Christian way in those areas of life. It's the old Wall Street movie with what's his name? Michael Douglas, right? Greed is good. And there are people who, with a straight face in the political world, who will tell you greed is good. Well, no. It may be baked into the pie in a capitalistic system, and try to put reins on that thing and ride it and use it to try to make the economy go and all of that. But no, it's sin. And when the Apostle Paul lists out these groups of people who aren't going to make it to heaven, it's not just the sexually immoral. They're in there. It's not just the drunkards. They're in there. It's also the greedy. It's a harder thing to measure. But how much of our own sense of, how much I should have, what's lifestyle. Years ago, read an article by a missionary, a guy who had been a missionary, and he was in Uganda in a gathering of Christians, and they do it a little bit more spontaneously and effusively than we do when we take our prayer requests up. But they had a portion of the worship service where people could just kind of from the seats blurt out their prayer requests. And the lady said, "Oh, Pastor, I am praising God." "What are you praising God for?" "I have shoes." And she wanted the whole congregation to join her in thanking God because she had shoes. How many are in your closet? And have you ever even thought that I ought to thank God that I just have a pair? A pair.
In my closet or my wife's closet?
Good job.
Well, I think we should thank God every day just for letting us wake up and be grateful for anything that we have, no matter how much or how little.
Bill DeMarcos.
Yeah, exactly so. Right, exactly so.
I think he has more shoes than I do.
Yeah,
Just saying.
At this point in life, that might be, although I need to throw a bunch more.
Hey, Pastor, I'll see if you can keep me on the right track here, but when they say like Babylonianized,
So last week we looked at Daniel
right?
having come from Jerusalem in the exile to Babylon. So the songs of Jerusalem, the worship, the air of Jerusalem, that's a metaphor in this quote for the Christian community per se, right? To become Babylonialized would be a metaphor for living in a culture outside of that, where you have to be in contact. It's where you are, but it's this tension again of not letting the culture take you over.
I always looked at that as kind of a worship system of what's of this world, nature, what the world gives.
Well, there's people today that want to be spiritual, not religious, and so they have kind of eschewed formal. My joke always is when they say, "Well, I don't like organized religion," and my kind of, I don't always say it because you got to weigh whether it's a good idea. But so you prefer disorganized religion? It's the religion thing they don't like, not the organization or disorganization is per se so much. But so yeah, I mean, it can be where there are people who think they're actually participating in a spiritual system of some sort. But I think it gets beyond that. To things that from we're going to have actually a last section where we're going to take a look at. We divide things into categories of spiritual and secular, and in certain contexts that can be useful. But there's a lot of things that people think of as secular that aren't.
I see the secular, or even the secular, as being Babylonianized.
Well, yes,
Really
that is the Babylon thing, right? So whether you think of it as a spiritual system or not, recognize that in as much as it's part of that kingdom of the prince of this world,
Right.
it is not spiritually neutral. So I understand that that in our own country with, say, the public school system, et cetera, that it should be non-sectarian, and that was a good idea, is a good idea. But to think that you can come up with that if you created a public school that was a completely atheistic and had no mention of God in it ever, and that's not somehow spiritual or religious, understand that although the atheists would object, they have a religion. It is a religion. The secularism is a religious movement. It is religious in its nature. They may object to that, but it is, right? It promotes its own set of morals. It's not as though it's morally neutral. It has a whole set of morals of what it thinks is good and bad and right and wrong. And it is fully and thoroughly religious in that sense. And it is completely spiritual. But the spirit behind it's not one you want to be a part of.
What do you mean it's spiritual?
It is in every way trying to work on heart and soul. And it has spirits literally involved.
And you're talking about atheists.
Atheism, secularism,
anything
call it
like
what you want. Humanism. Who's God in humanism?
Me.
Absolutely. You got a religion. You worship yourself, or you worship your things, your kind. That becomes God. In any system where God is not God, there is a God still. You cannot call him God, but you're just deceiving yourself. There is a God. That's baked into the pie of humanity. And you're only fooling yourself if you think that it's somehow neutral. Now, non-sectarian, okay, I get that. But it's not non-religious or non-spiritual. It's 100%. It's a false distinction.
With artificial intelligence and some of the ideas behind it now, it's sort of like, well, we're going to have godlike artificial intelligence running around, and that's going to be our new, really a god. And then also we're going to become immortal because we're going to all be, our souls are going to be put into the machine. So it's really a secular realization of that
Yes.
that sort of
Yes.
idea, and we have a tendency to worship in our society. We worship technology in the United States.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean that rises, right? Nietzsche, God is dead. Okay, so people may not think much of Nietzsche, but you probably should become a little bit familiar with his concepts because he understood that in his whole God is dead movement that you needed a replacement, and he expected kind of a secular religion to replace the historic religions that the West in particular had known. Right? He understood that had to be that way.
Well, what that would be based on is what's of this world, right?
Yes.
Not what we're supposed to be aspiring to.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to blow through 2 slides real quick here to get to the next section because it's a better place to stop. What does participation in a local congregation do for us as we contend with the culture in which we live? Well, okay, so it pulls us outside of ourselves. Plants us in the life of Christ. It connects us with the life of our brothers and sisters in the faith, and I mentioned that before, right? You know that you're not there all alone. Maybe as you're working in the office or whatever, nobody shares your faith directly or what have you, but you come here and you're not alone. You've got people to back you up. Every sermon we preach, is feeding you, is working on you, even the ones that you snooze through. And that happens, I know. I see you. I can see your eyes. Even if they're not shut, even if recently here I don't have people who are literally snoring.
That was cute.
I can tell from the eyes when people are tracking or not.
I've got students, I know.
Okay, I can tell that when I teach. But understand that being in the presence of the Word, which does not return to God void, but it accomplishes what He desires and achieves the purpose for which He sent it, Isaiah 55. God is working. Not working as well, perhaps, if you're paying better attention. And maybe it's not a memorable sermon. Maybe you walk out the door and you forgot the whole thing. But it was working on you, and the hymns were working on you, and the prayers were working on you, right? All of that is feeding the godly part of your culture. People have compared it sometimes to the meals you eat at home, right? 5 nights ago, what did we have for supper? Give me 10 minutes, I can probably walk you through the week what I ate. I don't remember most of it, but it fed me for the moment. And not all food has to be wonderful. Sometimes just enough to get you down the road. Right, I'm not excusing bad sermons. I'm just saying. It makes us smaller in ourselves and bigger in Jesus. Less us, more Him. That was John the Baptist's statement about He must become greater, I must become less. Right? So that's what this is all working on, and why it's a healthy part of being able to face what's out there. Being more of who we truly are is also being failures, those who fail to cut ourselves off from the world, but also fail to conform to it. And so we got one last section here. We'll pick it up next week. Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, and the so-called secular, which I've sort of anticipated for you, but we'll look at that a little bit more closely.